Congressman Tom Marino has withdrawn his nomination to be the Trump administration's drug czar. The president took to Twitter earlier writing, quote, Representative Tom Marino has informed me that he is withdrawing his name from consideration as drug czar. Tom is a fine man and a great congressman.
The announcement follows a joint investigation by 60 Minutes and the Washington Post, which highlighted Marino's role in sponsoring legislation that ultimately weakened the Drug Enforcement Administration's control over opioid drug distribution. So let us bring Caitlin Huey-Burns in. She is a CBSN political contributor and a national political reporter for RealClearPolitics. Caitlin, so got to get your reaction to the news that Marino is withdrawing his name.
Certainly big news. As we saw yesterday, the president was asked about this, said he might reconsider, would look into it. You saw pressure coming from Democratic lawmakers in Congress, particularly Joe Manchin, who had called for Marino to resign. This is a big deal because, as we know and as we've covered for several months, this was the fight against the opioid crisis was very much central to the president's campaign. 2 months ago, he said he would call this a national emergency, and he was asked about that yesterday because he hadn't done so yet. He's expected to make that announcement next week, he said.
So there's legislation that's been introduced to repeal the 2016 Marino bill. What are the chances of that happening?
Well, it's very interesting because you do have Democrats like Claire McCaskill calling for the repeal of this bill. She's a senator from Missouri. At the same time, you have Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, who helped negotiate this bill in the first place, saying that it has been misrepresented in the press. He's saying that the bill was designed to, clarify some of these restrictions, that seniors, veterans, others were not getting the medication that they needed, that sort of thing. So I certainly think there's going to be a discussion about this, but it's not yet clear whether a full repeal of this bill will happen. And what's interesting here is there is a question of how much lawmakers knew about this bill in the first place. As you know, this was passed through Congress, sailed through Congress very easily through an unanimous consent, which means they didn't actually vote on it. It was a voice vote. The former President Obama signed it into law. So there are a lot of questions about whether lawmakers really knew what was going on, and if they did, why are they raising their hands now about it after this reporting?
Right, exactly. So we have to talk about the press conference in the Rose Garden with Mitch McConnell. The president and Mitch McConnell are there. It's happening just a couple of days after Steve Bannon, one of his primary advisors, attacks McConnell on stage at a conservative voters summit. And not only he attacks McConnell specifically, but he also says that he's going to go after, mainstream establishment GOP candidates. Let's listen to how these two men responded when they were questioned about that.
Great.
Well, I have a very good relationship, as you know, with Steve Bannon. Steve's been a friend of mine for a long time. I like Steve a lot. Steve is doing what Steve thinks is the right thing. Some of the people that he may be looking at, I'm going to see if we talk him out of that, because, frankly, they're great people.
The goal here is to win elections in November. Back in 2010 and 2012, we nominated several candidates, Christine O'Donnell, Sharon Angle, Todd Akin, Richard Murdoch. They're not in the Senate. And the reason for that was that they were not able to appeal to a broader electorate in the general election. My goal as the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate is to keep us in the majority. The way you do that is not complicated. You have to nominate people who can actually win, because winners make policy and losers go home.
I wonder if he's thinking about Alabama when he says, you got to nominate people who can win. So anyways, let's talk a little bit about that. Earlier in the day, the president was asked about Bannon's comments at his cabinet meeting, the meeting of his cabinet. And he said, I can kind of see where Bannon's coming from. Right. He wasn't quite as firm in terms of promising to protect incumbents and mainstream or establishment Republicans. Anyways, what do you make of this whole thing?
Yeah, exactly. It was certainly an about face by the president. I think he was trying to have it both ways. You saw him in that cabinet meeting saying, I understand where Steve Bannon is coming from. A lot of people are upset with Congress right now. They are going to be the ones taking the blame for lack of inaction, not me. He said he won't be blamed. And that is actually, reflected in polling when you look at the Republican Party. A lot of Republican-based voters are frustrated with their own leadership. Then hours later in the Rose Garden, standing next to Mitch McConnell, he kind of softened his approach a little bit, saying, I might call Bannon and kind of make him reconsider a little bit. I don't think that's going to happen. Bannon and others, all of these outside groups that are kind of pushing for this, have made clear that they are really frustrated with the way things are going in Congress. They want to shake up their own party. They see that Donald Trump ran against his own party, really, and was effective, and they kind of want to tap into that anxiety and think it's effective for their purposes. Mitch McConnell was trying to make the point that, well, when you look at the landscape here, we need to win over seats. We need to expand our majority in order to get policy done. That's the reason that they haven't been able to pass some of these key items of legislation. So I think the president is trying to kind of thread the needle here. He needs Mitch McConnell to enact his policies, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't work out and he goes back and runs back against Mitch McConnell in 2018.
It's interesting to hear Senator McConnell saying that the goal is to win elections and not necessarily to make Americans' lives better. But that's something we can discuss because there's a lot to discuss. The president also came under fire yesterday for falsely claiming that President Obama and other past presidents didn't call families of fallen soldiers during their time in office. Yeah. I mean, I know you probably, if I ask you, Caitlin, what are legislators saying, you probably will say they're not saying a whole lot because it's almost impossible to get reaction every single day from the Congress when the president says something that is able to be proven false in that very moment.
Exactly.
But the idea that it's one thing to suggest that, perhaps I haven't called them yet or I haven't sent the letter out yet, but why go back and talk about past presidents and then when you're called out on it, throw your generals under the bus and say, well, they told me, and so I don't know. Yeah.
Glad, I think we should make the point clear, too, that when he made the initial statement that, Barack Obama and past presidents really didn't reach out really that much, it stood until he was questioned. He was fact-checked in the Rose Garden, and then he began to soften, and then he began to say, well, that's what I've been told, and that sort of thing. That's why he changed what he had to say.
Right, fact-checked in real time, within minutes, really, was pretty remarkable. He was asked, of course, about the fallen soldiers in Niger, and he said, he was asked why, over a week has passed, you have not contacted the families, and he said, I'm going to take a little time, and...
Let's play it. Let's play it for our viewers so that they can see.
If you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls. A lot of them didn't make calls. President Obama, I think, probably did sometimes, and maybe sometimes he didn't. I don't know. That's what I was told.
There you go.
Right there. He's, that's what I was told.
Because typically what happens is the president might say something that, you might question how accurate it is. And he's not fact-checked till later. An article may come out a day later or, somebody tweets out something. But it doesn't happen so frequently that he's fact-checked immediately.
And who would tell him that? Mattis, guys that have been in the military for their entire lives. It just smacks of he's being disingenuous.
It was one of those, to your point, too, just immediately fact-checked. Right? And we all have seen these images. We've seen Presidents Obama, Bush, others, of course, consoling families. We've seen those images. We've heard about them. The president is deflecting here, right? He's not. We know that he doesn't like to take responsibility for things, right? I think it would have been fine if he had said, just left it at that. Said, giving the families time to grieve. Let them have their time, and then I'm going to call and reach out. Presidents, the consoler-in-chief is a key part of being commander-in-chief, right? That's not exclusive to this president and other presidents. It's part of the role. And so trying to score political points here not only was distasteful, of course, but also just incorrect. And it raises the question of, why bother making that up at a time like this.
And the other thing that sort of came out of that press conference is two things. One, all of the past folks that have been tied to the administrations, Obama's administration, President Bush's administration, have come out very forcibly and said that's simply not true. I mean, I was surprised to see Eric Holder, the former Attorney General, saying on Twitter, stop lying. You're the president, right? And there was others that used much harsher language. The other thing is reporters seem to be indicating, look, the president has become more available. This president has become more available to reporters than perhaps President Obama. But does it really matter when the availability means that the president is speaking in making statements that are not necessarily true?
Right. Well, I mean, we as reporters love the fact that
Sure.
the president came out and spoke for 40, 45 minutes. What was really interesting, though, I mean, just bringing back up your point, was that it was easily fact-checked at the time. So I don't think that that benefits the president, but I certainly think that it benefits the public to kind of see that exchange going on and to see that those statements were rendered inaccurate at the time. And so he wasn't able to kind of backtrack that way. But again, deflecting the blame because he didn't want to be criticized for not reaching out to these families.
And let's just point out, he talked about not contacting the family, but the other thing was he didn't bring up these 4 fallen service members at all in tweets, in anything, while he was tweeting about, you know, the NFL.
Exactly,
Caitlin,
and that's why he was asked about it. Exactly, that's a good point.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you.
Thank you.